All right, let's make a slightly more complicated example. I'm going to take this kind of virtual trade show booth thing right here for our game Lorem Ipsum and export this out from Maya, load this into Sansar, and we'll set this up with a kind of an emissive material on this big floating sign up on the top to make that look like it's illuminated and glowing. And what we'll also do is have a screen placed in the middle right here, and I'm going to put a kind of an animation onto that screen. Now, one of the limitations of Sansar, unfortunately, is that it only lets you play one media stream per scene. So you can stream video from YouTube, from Twitch, from other kinds of sources, and have that coming into your scene. But you're only allowed to pick one video input stream for your scene. You can have more audio streams coming in, but as far as video streams go, you can only have one. And that one stream can get replicated on multiple surfaces, but you can't have multiple different videos playing simultaneously in the scene. So what that means is that if you want to have like a demo reel of your game playing on a screen in your object in this scene, we can't actually put like the YouTube video on that. But instead, what we can do is a kind of a very limited sprite sheet animation extracted out of that video and put that onto a surface instead. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do with this example right here. Let's take a look at what these will look like in Photoshop. So this is what that animation looks like. This is a 4-frame animation, basically like a sprite sheet, and each one of the frames is 256 by 256, and we just have one row with 4 frames of animation right here. So that's going to get placed onto this central screen in the middle, and you can see I've got my textures that I've made for the sign up on the top and for these little wing panels over here on the right and the left of the screen. I think I'll show you about how I'm doing the textures for that top sign. I'm going to make a emissive texture and an albedo texture, both out of the same basic image. So this is what that texture looks like all together. I've got my title going across the outside of the ring, and then I have some color for the inside of the ring and for the top. What I'm going to do is mask out the bottom part when I'm exporting the albedo texture, so that'll just be this matte color up here, and then I'll mask out those parts when I'm exporting the emissive texture. So that'll make it look like there's just like a screen illuminated around the outside of that ring. So anyhow, we'll take that model out from Maya, bring that into Sansar, and load up all of those materials. And then finally we'll add that same script to activate so that when you click on this little animated screen in the middle, it will load a URL. Going back over to Sansar, I'm going to start importing these objects. So let's go ahead and import our model. Find this file boothexample.fbx. And let's choose the materials. I'll leave this one, booth1 default white, as its defaults. Actually, no, I'm going to bring in a white texture for the albedo. So I'm going to click Browse right here and look for this little texture right here, white 64 by 64 .png. I'm going to go to Right Panel Material, and the texture file for that one I have is called sidepanels.png. And then go to Top Sign Material. Now this one I'm going to change the shader to be the standard plus emissive shader. For the albedo map, pick Top Sign albedo.png. Then I'll scroll down to choose the emissive map. Find top sign emmisve.png. I'm going to drop this emissive intensity down to 1. We can always change this later. I'll save the settings and then click Import. So now I've got it in my inventory. Let's filter this by things that I've created. So now I can find here booth example, this object, and let's bring it into the scene. Now, as we can see, it's very small because I didn't model this in the right scale. So I modeled this actually in a much smaller scale than what I need for my scene. So let's make this a little bit larger. I'll bring up the properties, and I'm going to change my scale to 25. And that looks a little bit better. So, kind of lazy modeling practice, but that's fine, it works. Now I'm going to go ahead and rotate this around. Now that we've got this set up in the scene, next I'm going to want to add in this screen that's going to go into the background. So I'm going to import that model as well. I'll click Browse, scroll down and look for screen.fbx. For the material here, I'm going to look for one of the materials that has the UV animation option enabled on it. I'm going to pick this one, Standard plus Emissive plus UV Animation. And when you choose those shaders, a series of additional options appear down here at the bottom that let you control how the texture is animated. I'm going to choose a default black albedo map and then go to the emissive map. I'm going to look for this file right here, the screenshot animated demo 2. .png. Scrolling down a little bit more, we'll tell it that there are 4 frames along the x-axis. So this means there's 4 columns and there's 1 row in my sprite sheet. So you can set this up as a full grid kind of a sprite sheet and add more frames into it if you want. I'm going to increase the step rate. I'll leave the emissive intensity at 3, and let's go ahead and save that, and then import it. Now let's bring that screen into the scene. This one I've also done with the wrong scale, so I'm going to need to scale this up. I'm going to rotate it around 180 degrees to face us. Remember that we have backface culling on, as we often do in many game engines, and so that's why that screen appeared to be invisible when I first loaded it. I was looking at it from behind. Alright, so let's go ahead and load that in there. Then finally I'm going to want to add the interaction script onto it to make it so it will load a website when we click on it. Let's go back to the inventory, and I'm going to look at scripts, find again the link giver script. Let's drag that here onto the screen. Something I should note here is that I have broken up the screen and the rest of that booth geometry, all the rest of that architecture, into two different objects. That's because I want the interaction to only be on the screen, not on the entire object. And so as before, we'll put in some little messages for the script to print out and display when we click on it, and then the URL that we want it to go to. So right here I'm just putting in, again, just itch.io, but you would put in your actual website address, itch.io page, Steam page, etc. So now we go ahead and save it, build it, and then we'll test it out. All right, so let's go check it out. Something to note is that there's no collisions on this by default. So in that import window, when we brought in the FBX, there is an option for loading a separate collision geometry, which you will want to make a sort of simplified version of your actual model geometry for efficiency. In this case, it's fine if I just make it so that I can walk through these little tables or whatever. Anyway, so now I'll walk up to this screen, and imagine that this is playing like a, well, it's like sprite sheet animation of gameplay footage, perhaps, or trailer or something like that. And I'll click this, and then it pastes the link into the chat.